Last week, the parsha was named Ki Teitze, when you go out, going out to wage war. This week, the parsha is Ki Tova, when you enter. Jewish people have gone through many battles and many struggles. And the goal of all these struggles is ultimately to reach to Ki Tovo, to enter into the land. And people will say, what do you mean enter the land? We are in the land. But this is not what we were promised, that we will have a land in which peace will reign supreme. So even though we have the great blessing that God gave us the opportunity to live in Israel and to prosper there, it's still in need of a completion. We need redemption, of course. And the parsha begins with the words, V'haya, it will come to pass, Kitovo, that you will enter the land. Our sages tell us in the Midrash that whenever the Torah uses the word V'haya, and it will come to pass, it's an expression of joy. That means that whatever follows is something associated with joy and happiness. And we can understand very easily, Kitova, when you enter the land, entering the land is the great source of joy. But when is it the source of joy? When the entering into the land is complete. One of the laws pertaining to the mitzvah of Bikurim, of bringing the first fruits to Jerusalem, which is the subject of this week's parsha in the very beginning, that a person had to bring his first fruits of the 7 species that Israel is known for: wheat, barley, 2 grains, and then 5 fruits: grapes, pomegranates, dates, olives, and figs. When those would ripen, you were obligated to bring them to the Beit HaMikdash, to the Holy Temple. But when did that obligation begin? Our sages tell us that it began only after they fully conquered the land and divided the land. Other agricultural obligations began as soon as they entered the land. But first fruits, which is a ceremony, involved a ceremony where they expressed great joy at having this bountiful harvest with these delicious fruits and the grains. You would express gratitude to God with great joy. That didn't begin until all the Jews settled in the land of Israel. Why did they have to wait? It was 14 years before this obligation would commence. And the Rabbi explains, because the first fruits had to be accompanied with great joy. The word V'haya again means joy. When you come into the land and you're in a state of joy and happiness, when could you really be in a state of joy and happiness when everyone experiences that joy and happiness? If it's incomplete, if it's lacking, then it's not true joy. So the word V'haya, which indicates joy, is precisely Kitovo. When you enter into the land, you fully enter into the land. It means all of the Jewish people, which will happen with the coming of Mashiach. Only then will we be able to say our joy is complete. Now, just before we read the beginning of this week's parsha, the end of last week's parsha is about the war against Amalek, the evil nation that sought to harm the Jewish people when they left Egypt. And Amalek is seen as the nation throughout history that tries to annihilate us, that is guilty of genocide. And throughout history, we always had one nation or another that sought not just to oppress the Jews, but to annihilate them. And we say that in the Haggadah, Shalo Echad Bilvad. It's not just one stood upon us to destroy us, but in every generation they stand up against us to destroy us. And now we see it openly, something that we couldn't have imagined could still be happening in the modern day and age, where people in Congress, congressmen and women, will get up there and support the bloodthirsty, genocidal Hamas. And not only do they say it openly that they support Hamas, but their fellow members, especially of their own party, don't condemn them and try to throw them out of Congress. But this is the fulfillment of what it says that in every generation they stand up against us to destroy us. But the end of that sentence is, and God will save us from their hands. But when will that happen? When Mashiach comes, which follows the elimination of Amalek, the destruction of this evil force. Now we can understand the juxtaposition of Amalek with the word Vahaya, which I said before is an expression of joy, because getting rid of Amalek means that we get rid of the final blockage, the final impediment for entering the land in this fullest sense of the word. We can enjoy life, we could have good things happening, many blessings, and they are indeed many blessings. We're living in the worst of times, you could say, and in the best of times. But as long as we don't have the complete redemption, as long as Amalek still lurks out there, our simcha, our joy is not complete. When you get rid of Amalek, which is what the end of last week's parsha deals with, Timcha, obliterating the memory of Amalek, then Vahaya, and then you can rejoice, because then Kitava al Aretz, then you will enter the land. Then your entry to the land will be complete. It won't be half-baked. But then there's another way of explaining the connection between destroying Amalek and Vahaya and the expression of joy. Amalek is a nation, an evil nation, but it's also an evil attitude. We have an internal Amalek. What is the internal Amalek? So our sages tell us that Amalek numerically adds up to the number 240, which is the same numerical value of the Hebrew word safek, which means doubt. Amalek is the evil influence that tries to sow doubts in our souls, that we should start doubting God, we should doubt Torah, we should doubt the mitzvot, we should doubt ourselves. Any doubt that cools you off, and that's what the Torah uses, the expression, he cooled you off on the way. Because when you have doubts, you might have been excited about something, but as soon as you have all these doubts and questions that are left unanswered, you begin to cool off and become desensitized. When you get rid of Amalek, that means you get rid of those doubts. And there's an expression that is cited by many great sages that there is no greater joy than the resolution of doubts. So that's why the Torah portion of last week ends with getting rid of doubts, getting rid of Amalek, the external Amalek, but also the internal Amalek. And when that happens, Vahaya, and then you will be able to rejoice, and then you will be able to fully enter the land. Because as long as you have doubts, you're afraid to enter into a new venture. There are people who are afraid of success because they don't have any confidence in themselves. They're always self-doubting. And if they don't have confidence in themselves, they'll never be happy. They can't be fully happy no matter how good their lives will be. And therefore, we get rid of Amalek, external Amalek, internal Amalek. Then we enter the land with full force, without any hesitation, without any compromises, without any watering down of that entry into the land. Later on, the Torah discusses what is referred to as the tochacha, the curses. You're dealing with 98 horrible curses that the Torah says will befall us if we don't listen to God and follow His commandments. We already had 48 curses in the end of the book of Leviticus. We read before Shavuos, and before Rosh Hashanah we read about these curses. And the Talmud says the reason why we read it at the end of the year before Rosh Hashanah, it's our way of saying, may the year with all of its curses end. Ending the year with the curses means we're ending the curses so that the new year could begin with all of its blessings. Now, the Torah doesn't just say curses, it also begins with blessings. And after the blessings, it lists a whole bunch of curses. Now, one of the curses and blessings seem to be using the same language with a very slight variation. Here is what it says in the beginning of the parsha, the beginning of the blessings. And it will be, if you obey the Lord your God to observe, to fulfill all his commandments, which I command you this day, the Lord your God will place you supreme above all the nations of the earth, and all these blessings will come upon you and overtake you if you obey the Lord your God. The expression will come upon you and overtake you. We're going to try to understand what that means, to overtake. Now, for the curses, the Torah states the following: and it will be, if you do not obey the Lord your God, to observe, to fulfill all his commandments and statutes which I am commanding you this day, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. So in both places, the Torah speaks about how either the blessings will overtake us or the opposite will overtake us. But there's a slight difference in the way the Torah describes overtaking, which is not evident in the translation. In Hebrew, the word for overtaking, v'hisigucha, is spelled differently when you compare the blessings to the curses. In the blessings, it's written without the letter vav. Now, some words in Hebrew, since Hebrew doesn't, in the Torah, doesn't have vowels, you can throw in the vav that becomes a vowel. Otherwise, the vowels are not written in the letters of the Torah. So in the blessings, it has the word v'hisigucha without the letter vav. In the curses, however, when it uses the same expression, v'hisigucha, they will overtake you, it uses the vav. So the question is asked by commentators, why does the Torah change the spelling? Every little nuance in Torah is significant and has a message. When it comes to the blessings, it doesn't have the vav. When it comes to the curses, it has the vav. Now the difference between having a vav and not having, according to Rabbeinu Bechai, one of the medieval commentators of the Torah, is that when it's without a vav, it's in the singular. When it's with a vav, it's in the plural. So what does this mean? That when you talk about the curses, it uses the plural as if to say, it's not just you that is suffering. God is suffering with you. There's a verse in the book of Psalms, Imo anochi b'tzara, I am with him in his distress. When Moses comes to the burning bush, what kind of a bush was it? It was a thorn bush. As if to say, God was revealing himself in the thorn bush, as if to say, just like you are in a state of suffering and anguish, you're in the thorns, so to speak, so too am I, God says, am suffering with you. When we realize that God is suffering with us, it makes our suffering somewhat lighter. That's why when it comes to the curses, it uses the vav, which means plural. God is suffering with us. When it talks about the blessings, obviously, we don't need to share the blessings. The blessings are all ours. That's one explanation. Another explanation given by the work called Sifsei Kohen. He was a disciple of the great Arizal, or a disciple of a disciple. And he writes the following, that when you use the vav, it means fully. The blessings, the curses will come fully upon you, all at once. When it talks about the blessings, it uses a weaker expression. Without the vav, they'll come one at a time, at the singular. What does that mean? And this Sifsei Kohen explains that if you have too much good showered upon you all at once, you won't be able to endure it. It'll overwhelm you. If you ever try it with a little child and you get them a birthday gift, I know this from my grandchildren, originally with my children, of course, but if you give them one gift, they'll love it. and it'll take them a few days. They may get bored with it. Then you give them another gift. And then a few days later, give them another. If you'd give them all the gifts all at once, it wouldn't be appreciated. It would overwhelm the kid, and the kid would be upset because after a few days, he'd be bored with all of the gifts. Well, we're like children in that respect. We can't take too much good at a time. One of the things that will happen when Mashiach comes is that God will give us the strength to endure all the blessings. Too many blessings all at once is too powerful for us to endure. And therefore, the Torah says, V'sigucha, without the vav, it's going to be one in the singular. It's going to be one blessing at a time. Many blessings will happen, but one at a time. Another way of explaining the meaning of v'hisigucha and why it's used in the singular in the case of the blessings. What does it mean that it'll overtake you? I mean, that when the Torah says the blessings will come upon you, we understand what that means, and they will overtake you. So the Saporno, one of the medieval commentators, says it means that even if we are not deserving, even if we don't ask for these blessings, the blessings will come to us. There's a deeper understanding of that, a more mystical understanding. Everything in this world has a purpose. What is the purpose of earth? The purpose of earth is that it should produce vegetation. What's the purpose of vegetation? That it will feed the animals. What's the purpose of animals? The animals will feed and help humanity. What's the purpose of humanity? To serve God. If you don't use the resources in this world to serve God, then we wasted those resources. What do the resources want? The resources want us to have them because the resources know that we will allow them to be elevated to the next level. So if the resources had a mouth to speak, the earth would cry out to us as, please plant some food there, because when you plant that food will nourish you, nourish your animals, and nurture you, and you will serve God. We will be elevated. So the earth wants us to grow crops, and it wants us to prosper. And the crops also want us to consume them, because when we consume them and they're kosher and we recite a blessing and we do it for the sake of serving God, then the vegetation and the animals become elevated. So in a certain sense, overtaking means that the world itself wants us to prosper, because the more we prosper, the better off they are, assuming that we use everything for the right purpose, for a higher purpose. But there's a catch over here. The catch is that in order for us to internalize the blessings and truly appreciate them, we have to receive the blessings the right way. If you want the blessings to overtake us because they want us, we have to do it the right way. And what is the right way? Without the vav, humble. If we don't come and say, God owes us everything, we're so great and we're so special, and we're arrogant about it, then we frustrate, we undermine the very process of elevating everything. So when we talk about the world overtaking us, all the blessings overtaking us, we have to receive them humbly. One other explanation. The Talmud tells us that in 5 places, the word Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet, is spelled without the letter Vav. Normally it's spelled with the letter Vav, but in 5 places in the Torah, the Vav is missing. On the other hand, in 5 places, the word Yaakov, Jacob, which is normally written without a Vav, in 5 places it's written with a Vav. How do we account for that? So our sages tell us, Eliyahu is the one who's going to announce the future redemption. He's going to usher in the future redemption through Mashiach. But he may tarry, he may not feel the importance of doing it. For whatever reason, he may not do it. So Yaakov, who's the father of the Jewish people, the progenitor of all of the Jews, he took the Vav from Eliyahu's name and keeps it as collateral to guarantee that Eliyahu will not tarry, Eliyahu will come. Now, what's the deeper meaning of all that? The letter Vav, the Zohar says, is a letter that represents truth. Why? Because the Vav is a line. A line is something that's consistent. It goes straight from the top through the middle to the bottom. I mentioned this in many classes. The Jerusalem Talmud says that the meaning of emet, truth, is more than just the absence of a lie. It means something that is consistent, because the word emet has the first letter of the alphabet, the aleph, the mem is the middle letter, and the tuf is the final letter. So what is emes or emet? When you're consistent from the beginning through the middle to the end. That's what a vav is. It's a line. It's straight. It goes from the top to the middle to the bottom without deviating, without changing direction. Eliyahu, therefore, is the symbol of truth. Now, Eliyahu himself will say, what do I need Mashiach? Mashiach is going to bring the world to a state of truth. Right now in exile, we're living in an inconsistent world. We're living in an imperfect world. Mashiach will come, the world will become a perfect world. So Eliyahu says, I already have that perfection. Eliyahu never died, so he represents perfection. He says, I don't need Mashiach, I don't need redemption. I already experienced that. In order for Eliyahu to recognize that something is missing in this world, and that will motivate him to come and usher in the redemption, Jacob took the Vav away from Eliyahu and keeps it as a guarantee that Eliyahu will understand what it means to be in exile. That's subjecting Eliyahu, giving him a taste of exile. And that way, he will motivate himself to bring Mashiach and take us out of exile once and for all. Now we're talking about redemption, and we're talking about Amalek, we're talking about the anti-Semitism. In the Haggadah, there's the middle of the Haggadah, for Passover, we recite passages from this week's Torah portion. Because when a person would come to the Holy Temple to bring his first fruits, he would make a whole declaration surveying Jewish history of the suffering and persecution and how God took us out. And it starts off by talking about one of the ancestors of the Jewish people, Lavan, Jacob's father-in-law, who's called the Aramean, but the Hebrew word for Aramean could also be translated as the swindler. And the Torah tells us, Oved Avi, he tried to destroy my father. He tried to destroy Jacob. And Rashi says, and in the Haggadah it's mentioned as well, Bikesh Lakaras Hakol, he tried to uproot everything. He tried to destroy everything. He tried to undermine the entirety of the Jewish people. In that sense, even worse than Pharaoh. Because Pharaoh only decreed against the boys, but the girls would be allowed to live. But he wanted to destroy everything. So the question is, where do we find that Laban, tried to destroy everything? In what way did he destroy everything? He didn't kill anybody. It's hard to imagine that he wanted to kill his own children, his own grandchildren. So one way of understanding that is focusing on the Hebrew word. Bikesh, he sought. Lakar, to uproot. Es hakol, everything. The word hakol, everything, has a deeper meaning. It doesn't just mean, in many contexts, it means everything, everyone. But sometimes the word kol means the totality, the communal entity, the body of community. Lavan didn't care if Jacob and his children and his grandchildren will be like individuals like everyone else. He could not tolerate the fact that one of his descendants, Jacob, his son-in-law, and his son-in-law's descendants will constitute a nation, a klal, a communal entity, a collective. Jew as an individual, sure. A Jew as a member of a nation, no. He would not tolerate that. And if we were not part of a nation, we would never have survived. In Napoleon's time, and Napoleon wasn't the author of this statement, but he used it, that he was willing to give Jews freedom, emancipation as individuals, not as a nation. Sometimes the anti-Semite doesn't seek to destroy every individual Jew. He tries to destroy the Jewish nation, as we see today. They speak about how they're not anti-Jewish. You as a Jew, as an individual, they say, although I don't believe what they say either, we're not going to harm you, but you can't be part of a nation. You're not a nation. And therefore, you're not entitled to have a land, because only a nation is entitled to have its own land. Well, that's what Lovin wanted to do. But if we're not a nation, and yes, we're a nation even if we don't live in Israel, we're part of that nation wherever we live. But if we're not a nation, then we cannot survive, because our strength comes from the fact that we are all united together as one people, and that's unification is the strength with which we defeat Lavan, with which we defeat Pharaoh, with which we defeat Amalek, with which we defeated Haman. What was Haman's argument about the Jewish people? He says they're not really a nation. They're scattered all over. What did he mean by that? They're scattered all over. So what if they're scattered all over? That means they're not really a nation. If they're not really a nation, then they don't have the ability to survive. And Haman was saying they're not going to survive anyhow, so let's get rid of them because they're going to disappear at any rate. That's the strength of the Jewish people. And we defeated Haman. We defeated the Greek Hellenists. We defeated the Romans. We defeated every empire that sought to destroy us. And we are today strong because of God's protecting us, as we say in the Haggadah. In every generation they stand up against us to destroy us, and God saves us from their hands. And it's that promise that God made at the beginning of our nationhood that has kept us alive till today. Not only is it we're alive today, but we're the greatest miracle. If someone says, where are the miracles today? There are many miracles, but the greatest miracle that in all of human history is the survival of the Jewish people, not only as individuals, but as a people. And God should help us that we should see the final redemption when we will come into the land fully with great joy, without Amalek, without the doubts, without the threats, without all the negatives, and then our joy will be complete.